In a makeshift workshop at the back of a modest house in Springfield, the morning sun filtered through the cracks in the tin roof, creating beams of light that danced across tools meticulously organized on a wooden panel. The distinctive smell of grease and fuel permeated the air, mingling with the aroma of strong coffee that Anthony Lewis sipped while leaning over the engine of a 1976 Chevette. Rachel, an 8-year-old girl, watched attentively every movement her father made, her brown eyes shining with curiosity. Unlike other children in the West Side neighborhood who ran through the dirt roads or played with dolls in their backyards, she preferred the metallic and enigmatic universe of her father's workshop. "Dad, why does that noise continue even after—" "You changed the belt?" asked Rachel, leaning toward the engine with unusual confidence for her age. Anthony raised his eyebrows, surprised by his daughter's precise observation. Many adult customers couldn't identify that irregular sound. "You have a good ear, daughter. It's not the belt that's the problem. It's the alternator bearing that's worn out," he replied, cleaning his hands on a rag already stained with oil. "Want to see how it works?" The girl's face lit up with a smile that revealed 2 missing baby teeth. Before she could answer, her mother's voice cut through the moment. "Anthony, you're not putting those ideas in the girl's head again, are you?" "Rachel, come inside right now. You have homework to do." Rachel's expression instantly withered. Anthony exchanged a knowing look with his daughter and whispered, "Saturday morning, when your mom goes to the market, we'll continue our lesson." The promise was enough to make the girl's week more bearable. At the public school where she studied, Rachel faced the first signs that her interest wasn't well received. While other girls exchanged princess stickers and talked about children's shows, she drew engines and gears in the margins of her notebooks. "Look at the boy girl," mocked Jason, a classmate, when he saw her leafing through a car magazine she had borrowed from the corner newsstand. "You'll get hands like a construction worker just like your dad." The words hurt, but not as much as her inability to explain what she felt. How could she say that each engine part seemed to tell a story? That the sound of a well-tuned car was like music to her ears? That dismantling and reassembling broken toys gave her a sense of purpose that no doll had ever provided? Years passed, and the Lewis's backyard gradually transformed into a workshop recognized throughout the neighborhood. Anthony, who had worked in factories and dealerships before starting his own business, gained more and more customers. Many came attracted by his affordable prices, but returned for his honesty and competence. At 15, Rachel was no longer just an observer. In the afternoons after school and on weekends, when she managed to evade her mother's vigilance, she became her father's official apprentice. Her hands, which still maintained their youthful delicacy, handled tools with a precision that impressed even the most skeptical customers. "That girl has the gift," commented Mr. George, the local bakery owner, as he watched Rachel identify a problem in the electronic injection system of his Fiat Uno that other mechanics hadn't been able to diagnose. "Takes after her father," Anthony replied. But deep down he knew his daughter was already surpassing him in many ways. While he had learned everything through practice, Rachel combined workshop experience with the knowledge from physics and math books she devoured at the school library. At home, the tension increased. Martha didn't understand her daughter's obsession and feared for her future. "Isn't it enough to have a husband coming home every day smelling like burnt oil? Now my daughter too," she complained while vigorously scrubbing grease stains from Rachel's clothes. On Sunday nights, when the family gathered for dinner, the heavy silence was broken only by the clinking of cutlery and superficial comments about the weather or neighbors. Rachel's dreams hung in the air like a forbidden subject. It was on one of those nights when she turned 17 that Rachel finally took courage. "I'm going to apply to the University of Illinois for mechanical engineering." Martha's fork fell noisily onto her plate. "No way, engineering is for men, Rachel. Why don't you do education or nursing?" "Because it's not what I want, Mom. I like engines, fixing things." "And you'll live covered in grease being made fun of. Don't you see how people look when you're helping your father? The comments they make behind your back?" Anthony, who had remained silent until then, intervened. "Martha, our daughter has talent. You should see how she understands electronic injection systems better than many trained engineers I know. Understanding doesn't mean she should follow that path, Anthony. The world out there isn't like our home, isn't like our neighborhood, where people have already gotten used to her eccentricities. Rachel felt her eyes burning, but she held back tears. They're not eccentricities, Mom, it's who I am. That night, lying in her small bed in a room decorated with car posters instead of bands or actors, Rachel made a promise to herself. No matter how many obstacles she faced, how many doors closed, she would build her path in the world of mechanics. In the following weeks, while school colleagues discussed graduation parties and appropriate career plans, Rachel studied until late at night. Physics, mathematics, chemistry, each subject was a tool for her goal. Her father, sensing her determination, began bringing technical books from engineer friends and even arranged a visit to an automobile factory in Dearborn. The school principal, Mrs. Cecilia, called Martha in for a conversation, concerned about Rachel's unusual fixation. Your daughter has potential for any career, Mrs. Lewis, but this obsession with mechanics, isn't it a bit inappropriate for a young lady? Martha agreed vigorously, sharing her own concerns. However, upon returning home and finding Rachel bent over technical manuals, she felt a twinge of admiration for her daughter's determination. Maybe, just maybe, Rachel knew what she was doing. The day of the college entrance exam arrived relentlessly. While waiting for the bus that would take her to Chicago, Rachel trembled not with fear but with anticipation. Anthony handed her a small polished wrench, almost like a charm. It belonged to my father, your grandfather. He would be proud to see how far you'll go. At that moment, under the light drizzle falling on the Springfield bus stop, Rachel felt she wasn't just taking an exam, she was challenging an entire world that insisted on dictating what a woman could or couldn't. But if this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The University of Illinois Chicago campus seemed like a different world to Rachel. The imposing buildings of the College of Engineering, with their concrete and glass facades, contrasted with the simplicity of her father's workshop in Springfield. On the first day of class, she felt the weight of curious and at times hostile glances. In a class of 80 students, only 7 were women, and none of them showed the same interest in combustion engines as Rachel. Everyone, quiet. Professor. Henry Morrison's deep voice echoed through the packed amphitheater. Welcome to mechanical engineering. Look to your side. Half of you won't be here next semester. The professor's eyes briefly lingered on Rachel, as if betting she would be among the first to give up. That look, far from intimidating her, ignited an even more intense flame. In the student housing where she secured a place, she shared a room with Julie, an architecture student who didn't understand her enthusiasm for engine parts. How can someone trade Paris for a stinky workshop? Julie asked one night, leafing through a fashion magazine while watching Rachel study automatic transmission diagrams. The same way someone prefers to design buildings rather than dresses, Rachel replied, without raising her eyes from the books. The first weeks were about adaptation. The intense pace of classes, the technical vocabulary, the sleepless nights studying formulas and concepts that went far beyond the practical knowledge she had acquired in her father's workshop. While colleagues complained about the difficulties, Rachel absorbed every piece of information like a sponge, fascinated by the chance to finally understand the theory behind the machine she loved so much. In the fluid mechanics laboratory, Professor Rafael Bueno divided the class into groups for an experiment with hydraulic pumps. When it came time to distribute roles, Rachel was assigned to take notes while the boys handled the equipment. Professor, can I help with the assembly? I have experience with hydraulic systems, suggested Rachel, remembering the countless times she had repaired hydraulic steering systems in the workshop. Better focus on taking notes, Lewis. Leave the heavy work to those who are used to it, replied the professor, provoking snickers among some students. That night, Rachel cried silently into her pillow, not from humiliation, but from the frustration of being judged before even showing her capability. The next morning, she woke determined to prove her worth through results. During a machine elements class, the professor proposed a challenge. Identify the failure in a starter motor based solely on a recorded sound. While colleagues debated possibilities based on complex calculations, Rachel closed her eyes, focusing only on the familiar noise. "It's the solenoid, Professor. The return spring is worn, causing the gear not to disengage completely after ignition," she said, with the confidence of someone who had solved the same problem dozens of times. The silence that followed was broken by the professor's confirmation, visibly surprised. "Correct, Lewis. Impressive." It was the first of many small triumphs. In theoretical tests, her scores were always among the highest. In practical work, when she finally got a chance, her manual skill stood out. Even so, invitations to study groups rarely came, and at college parties, she was often mistaken for a student from another program. "You don't look like an engineer," commented a senior student during a social gathering, looking her up and down. "And what should an engineer look like?" she retorted, already tired of that type of observation. By the end of the second semester, when half the original class had already given up or failed, as Professor Morrison had predicted, Rachel not only continued, but thrived. Her grades caught the attention of the Department of Mechanical Systems, and she was invited to a scientific initiation project on energy efficiency in internal combustion engines. The advising professor, Edward Martin, was one of the few people at the college who seemed genuinely interested in her potential, without prejudice. Trained in Germany and with experience in automotive companies that valued diversity, he saw in Rachel not an anomaly, but a talent to be cultivated. "Lewis, you have something that can't be taught: mechanical intuition. Combine that with the theory you're learning, and there won't be a problem you can't solve," he said after Rachel identified a flaw in the prototype they were developing, even before the sensors detected it. In Professor Martin's laboratory, Rachel finally found a space where her passion was respected. On Friday nights, while colleagues went to bars and parties, she often stayed late, testing hypotheses, adjusting parameters, lost in the pleasure of scientific discovery. It was during these nights that she met Carl, a doctoral student who also worked in the laboratory. Unlike other men at the university, Carl never treated her as a curiosity or an intruder. They talked about technological advances, discussed scientific articles, and shared the same enthusiasm for classic cars. "My dad has a 1979 VW bus sitting at his farm. It's practically intact, just needs a revision of the electrical system," Carl mentioned during a coffee break. "I can take a look if you want. I grew up fixing those models in my dad's workshop," offered Rachel. The following weekend, the two traveled to the countryside to see the car. As Rachel bent over the engine with the familiarity of someone returning to an old friend, Carl watched admiringly as she diagnosed problems just by sound and appearance. "How can you know all this without even using equipment?" he asked, genuinely curious. "My dad used to say that before trusting machines, we need to trust our senses. The smell, the sound, the vibration. Everything tells a story," she replied, smiling as she managed to start the engine that had been silent for years. That afternoon at the farm marked the beginning of a friendship that would become fundamental for Rachel. Carl wasn't just a colleague, but an ally who defended her when professors or students underestimated her ability. In the third year of the course, Rachel faced one of her biggest challenges: the automotive projects discipline, taught by Professor August Ferguson, known for his rigor and his conservative opinions about women's role in engineering. On the first day of class, when calling roll and reaching Rachel's name, Ferguson made a point of commenting, "Ah yes, our female representative. I hope you have the stomach to keep up with the pace of this course, Miss Lewis. I won't make it easier just because you're a woman." "I don't expect special treatment, Professor. Just the same opportunities as the other students," she replied, maintaining her composure despite the public humiliation. The semester with Ferguson was a test of endurance. Her submissions were always more questioned, her presentations interrupted with tricky questions, and her mistakes, however minor, exaggeratedly pointed out. Meanwhile, mediocre work from some colleagues received disproportionate praise. The constant pressure began to affect her performance and her health. Sleepless nights, Irregular eating and the constant anxiety of having to prove her worth transformed her into a shadow of the confident student who had entered the university. It was Julie, her roommate, now more a friend than just a roommate, who noticed the signs of exhaustion. "Rach, you won't win by proving you're just like them. You'll win by being yourself, with your own approach," she said, while preparing tea for her exhausted friend. Those simple words triggered a change in perspective. Instead of trying to fit the traditional mold of the mechanical engineer, Rachel began to embrace her difference as an advantage. Her sensitivity to detail, her intuitive approach, combined with technical knowledge, her communication skills, all of this positively differentiated her. For Ferguson's final project, instead of following the conventional approach of prioritizing performance at any cost, Rachel proposed a transmission system that balanced power, energy efficiency, and ease of maintenance. Her presentation highlighted not only the technical aspects, but also considerations about sustainability and accessibility for mechanics with limited resources, something she had learned by watching her father work with adapted parts. The room was silent when she finished. Professor Ferguson, visibly uncomfortable with the undeniable quality of her work, limited himself to a dry comment. "Interesting approach, Lewis. Perhaps a bit too sentimental for the real market." That perhaps was the biggest concession he had ever made. To Rachel, it sounded like a victory. When the final year of college arrived, Rachel was no longer just the girl from mechanics. She was recognized for her academic excellence, for her contributions to research projects, and for her unwavering determination. The same professors who had once ignored her now recommended her for internships and opportunities. At the graduation ceremony, as she received her diploma with honorable mention as the top of her class, Rachel spotted in the audience the proud face of Anthony, Martha's teary eyes, who had finally begun to accept her daughter's choice, and Carl's encouraging smile, who had become her best friend and confidant. In that moment of triumph, however, she knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The university, with all its barriers, was only a diluted reflection of the real world that awaited her. The framed diploma on the wall contrasted with the casual atmosphere of the small, improvised waiting room at Silver & Sons Auto Parts, where Rachel awaited her first job interview. After sending more than 50 resumes to dealerships, manufacturers, and specialized workshops in Chicago, this had been one of the few positive responses she had received. "Mr. Silver will see you now," announced the receptionist, a middle-aged woman who did not hide her surprise when she saw Rachel stand up. She had clearly expected the candidate for the mechanical engineer position to be a man. In the cramped office, among parts catalogs and calendars featuring scantily clad women in provocative poses on car hoods, Gerald Silver, a burly man in his 50s, analyzed Rachel's resume with an expression that oscillated between distrust and curiosity. "First in your class at UIC, huh?" "Impressive," he commented without raising his eyes from the paper. "But here, in real life, pretty diplomas don't fix cars." He finally looked at her. "Have you worked in a real shop or just in theory?" "I grew up in my father's workshop in Springfield. I started dismantling engines at 12, Rachel replied, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the condescending treatment. Silver let out a short laugh. "And what did your father think about that? Didn't he have any sons to teach the trade to?" The question was a clear provocation, but Rachel took a deep breath before answering. "My father believed that talent has no gender, Mr. Silver, and I'm the best in my class not by chance, but because I've understood cars since I can remember." Something in the firmness of her response seemed to please the man, who slightly changed his posture. "Let's see if you're as good as you say. I have a Mitsubishi Pajero in the shop for 3 days. Nobody can identify why the engine is stalling. At high RPM. If you discover the problem by the end of the day, the job is yours." Rachel accepted the challenge with a nod. She followed Silver to the service area, where 5 mechanics worked on different vehicles. The sound of tools and the familiar smell of oil and fuel brought a comforting sensation, as if she were back at her father's workshop. All eyes turned to her when Silver announced, "Guys, this is the engineer who came from UIC. She's going to show us how to fix a Pajero." The expressions ranged from amusement to barely disguised contempt. One of the mechanics, the youngest, opened a mocking smile. "Careful not to break your nails, Doctor." Ignoring the comment, Rachel approached the vehicle, asked for the keys, hand-started the engine. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing only on the sound of the engine. Then she requested a diagnostic scanner and began checking the injection system parameters. After almost 2 hours of methodically conducted tests, she identified the problem: a combination of partially obstructed injectors and a defective temperature sensor, causing an inadequate air-fuel mixture at high RPMs. "I need 4 new injectors and a compatible temperature sensor model," she requested from the parts clerk, who looked at Silver for confirmation before attending to her request. For the rest of the afternoon, Rachel worked on replacing the parts, aware of the evaluative gazes that followed her. Her hands moved with precision and confidence, reflecting years of practice. When she finally closed the hood and cleaned her hands on the rag, the sun was already setting. "Ready? You can test it now," she said to Silver, who had been monitoring the service from a distance. The owner started the engine and accelerated progressively. The engine responded without hesitation, even when it reached high RPMs. The problem was solved. "Not bad," admitted Silver, with a reluctant nod of approval. "The job is yours. Start Monday, 7 o'clock. That was the beginning of 6 months of daily trials. Although she had gotten the job, Rachel soon realized that being accepted was a completely different battle. Customers frequently refused to be attended by her, requesting a real mechanic. Colleagues hid tools from her workbench or deliberately offered incorrect information about specific shop procedures. On a particularly difficult morning, after a customer had rejected her analysis of a problem in the automatic transmission of a Toyota Corolla, Rachel found her personal toolbox, a graduation gift from her father, completely empty. "Has anyone seen my tools?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure despite the anger boiling internally. Silence was the only response, accompanied by dissimulated glances among colleagues. Only Josh, the oldest mechanic on the team, seemed bothered by the situation. Donay. Afternoon, while everyone left for lunch, Josh approached discreetly. "Your tools are in the locker room cabinet under the old towels. It was Mark who took them. He's afraid you'll take his place as team leader." "Thank you, Josh," Rachel replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. "You know, girl, I have a daughter about your age. She wanted to be a police officer. Everyone said it wasn't a place for a woman." The old mechanic paused, a discreet smile forming on his time-marked face. "Today she's a lieutenant. Don't let these hardheads knock you down." That conversation was a rare moment of human connection in a predominantly hostile environment. In the following months, Josh became a silent ally, occasionally sharing tips about the most complex vehicles or warning her about the traps that others set. Despite Josh's veiled support, the general situation did not improve. The most interesting and challenging cases were distributed among the other mechanics, while Rachel received mainly basic maintenance services. Her engineering education, which should have been a differential, was treated as an irrelevant curiosity. The last straw came when a customer brought in a Ferrari 458 Italia for a complete diagnosis before a trip. It was exactly the kind of technical challenge Rachel had studied so hard for. However, Silver didn't even consider assigning her the service. "Ferrari is not a car for beginners, much less for—" "Well, you understand," he said, without completing the sentence, but making the prejudice clear. That night, lying in her small rented apartment in East Chicago, Rachel stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of accumulated frustration. The phone rang, interrupting her somber thoughts. "Hi, Dad," she answered, trying to sound more cheerful than she actually was. "How are things going at the big city shop?" asked Anthony, with that tone that indicated he already suspected the answer. Rachel hesitated. She didn't want to worry her father, but she also couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. "Hard, Dad, very hard. Nobody takes me seriously, nobody trusts my work. Sometimes I think all the study, all the effort was in vain." There was silence on the other end of the line before Anthony responded. Remember that 1980 Ford Galaxy that showed up at our place? Everyone said it was a lost cause, that it wasn't worth the work. I remember. You worked on it for almost 6 months. And today it runs like new. Some things, daughter, are worth the fight even when no one else believes. Anthony paused. Your mother and I were talking. That corner in the back of the yard where we keep the old tools. What if you came back and set up your own shop there? The proposal caught Rachel by surprise. Returning to Springfield, to her parents' home, seemed like a step backward after fighting so hard to earn her place in Chicago. On the other hand, the idea of having her own business, doing things her way without having to prove her worth every minute, was tempting. I'll think about it, Dad. Thank you. The following Monday, Rachel arrived at the shop determined to have a frank conversation with Silver. She found him in the office analyzing cost spreadsheets. Mr. Silver, we need to talk about my situation here, she began directly. I'm a trained engineer. I have advanced technical knowledge, but I'm changing oil and filters like any beginner. I want more challenging cases. I want to use my education. Silver leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. Look, Rachel, you're good, I won't deny it. But this business is complicated. Customers don't trust a woman working on their cars, especially luxury ones. It's not personal, it's business. It's exactly because it's business that you should better utilize my capabilities. I'm wasted changing brake pads. Maybe this isn't the right place for you then, replied Silver with a tone that ended the conversation. That same afternoon, Rachel resigned. The reaction of her colleagues ranged from barely disguised relief to the genuine surprise of Josh, who discreetly handed her a card with his phone number. If you need help with whatever comes next, you can call me. The following weeks were ones of reflection and planning. Rachel visited other shops in Chicago, but the interviews followed a discouragingly familiar pattern: initial distrust, practical tests to prove her competence, and eventually offers for positions below her qualification. After the 4th month of fruitless searching, she decided to accept her father's proposal. She returned to Springfield, not as a defeated person, but as someone who retreats strategically to gain momentum. The space at the back of the house was small, but it had potential. With Anthony's help, she cleaned, organized, and adapted the place. She invested her savings in essential tools and a basic hydraulic lift. A simple sign in front of the house announced, Lewis Auto Service, specialist in electronic diagnostics. The first customers came by recommendation from Anthony, neighbors and acquaintances who trusted the old mechanic's judgment. The start was modest: alignments, balancing, oil changes, and small repairs. But Rachel took every opportunity to demonstrate her differentiated knowledge, explaining the problems and solutions to customers in detail. Gradually, the small shop's reputation began to grow. A satisfied customer brought another, and stories about the mechanic who understands more than the dealerships began to circulate. People from neighboring areas appeared with problems that other shops couldn't solve, especially issues involving complex electronic systems, an area in which Rachel had specialized during college. 6 months after the inauguration, the schedule was so full that Anthony, who initially just gave a hand, became an official partner in the business. Together they attended to everything from economy cars to imported models, whose owners sought quality service without the exorbitant prices of dealerships. On a particularly busy Saturday afternoon, while Rachel was finalizing the diagnosis of a faulty air conditioning system in a Honda Civic, a BMW X5 parked in front of the shop. From the vehicle emerged a middle-aged man, wearing casual but clearly expensive clothes. I'm looking for engineer Rachel Lewis, he said, introducing himself as Richard Mitchell, a businessman in the technology sector. That's me, replied Rachel, cleaning her hands on the rag she always carried in the pocket of her overalls. My cousin George told me about you, said you fixed his Range Rover after the dealership spent 3 weeks without identifying the problem. Richard seemed simultaneously skeptical and hopeful. My BMW has an intermittent failure in the injection system. It only happens when the engine is hot after running for more than an hour. The dealership in Evanston has already changed sensors, checked the electronic control unit, but the problem persists. This was exactly the kind of challenge Rachel most appreciated. Complex, intermittent problems that required more than simply following procedure manuals. "I can take a look now, if you have time," she offered. Over the next 2 hours, Rachel conducted a meticulous analysis, connecting her personal laptop to the BMW system to access parameters that conventional scanners couldn't detect. She identified a pattern of variation in fuel pressure that occurred only under specific conditions of temperature and load. "It's the fuel pump," she finally concluded. "It's not completely defective, which is why standard tests don't detect it. But when subjected to prolonged stress, it loses efficiency. It needs to be replaced." Richard, who had followed the whole process with growing interest, seemed impressed. The dealership wanted to replace the entire electronic control unit. It would cost almost as much as an economy car. "Replacing the pump will cost 1/10 of that," replied Rachel. "I can order the original part for Monday." At the end of the service with the problem solved, Richard asked an unexpected question. "Have you thought about expanding your business? This place is good, but with your knowledge, you could serve a much larger clientele." The question echoed in Rachel's mind long after Richard left. Expanding would mean more investment, more responsibility, possibly hiring employees, and facing market prejudices again, now as a businesswoman. 2 years passed since the conversation with Richard Mitchell. The small workshop at the back of the Lewis house had transformed into a respected establishment in the region. The original space had been expanded, incorporating the neighboring lot that Rachel had managed to buy with growing profits. State-of-the-art diagnostic equipment shared space with traditional tools, creating an environment that blended the wisdom of classic mechanics with the most advanced technologies. On a Wednesday morning, while Rachel adjusted the electronic balancing on an Audi A5, Josh, the old mechanic who had become her first employee after Silver's shop went bankrupt, approached with a concerned expression. "Boss, there's a problem with Mr. Thompson's truck." Alvin Thompson was the owner of a small local transportation company. His truck, a 2010 Volkswagen, was his family's only source of income and had been in the shop for 3 days with a problem in the diesel injection system. "What happened?" asked Rachel, sliding out from under the Audi. "The part we need, the high-pressure pump, is only available at the dealership in Evanston. I called to confirm, but it costs almost $8,000, and the delivery time is 10 days. Rachel bit her lip, thoughtful. She knew that Thompson couldn't go without work for so long, nor did he have the resources for such a high immediate investment. "There's that reconditioned pump that Carl sent from Chicago last week," suggested Josh. "Maybe we could adapt it." "No, it's too risky. If it fails on the road, the damage will be even greater." Rachel thought for a moment. "I'll go to Evanston to get the part personally. I know someone at Premium Motors who might be able to expedite the process." Premium Motors was one of the largest multi-brand dealerships in Evanston, specializing in luxury vehicles, but also supplying parts for commercial vehicles. Rachel had met the parts manager, Frank, at a refresher course on diesel electronic systems the previous year. "Are you sure it's almost 2 hours of travel?" observed Josh. "I'm sure Thompson can't wait. That truck feeds an entire family." Rachel called Paul, the young apprentice she had recently hired, and instructed him on how to finish the service on the Audi. "I'll take a quick shower and hit the road. I'll be back by the end of the afternoon." The trip to Evanston gave Rachel a rare moment of solitude and reflection. As she drove her 2015 VW Golf, bought with great pride as her first-owned car, she thought about how her life had changed. The shop now had 4 employees: Josh, Paul, Mary, a young mechanics student who had been an intern and was now a permanent employee, and her own father, Anthony, who was officially semi-retired, but still showed up every day to give advice and help with the older customers. The transformation wasn't just professional. The confidence that now naturally emanated from Rachel contrasted with the insecure young woman who had trembled at her first job interview. Her technical knowledge, previously frequently questioned, was now sought after even by other shops when they faced complex cases. Upon arriving at Premium Motors, however, a familiar and uncomfortable sensation hit her. The impeccably clean environment, with gleaming porcelain floors and luxury cars on display, was worlds away from the reality of the small shop in Springfield. Customers in business attire talked with impeccably dressed salespeople, while soft music played in the background. Rachel looked at herself. Jeans, the shop's t-shirt with small grease stains that would never completely come out, and safety boots. It wasn't the typical look of the establishment's frequenters. Taking a deep breath, she headed to the reception where a young woman with an impeccable appearance was answering calls. "Good morning. I'd like to speak with Frank from the parts department, please." The receptionist raised her eyes, analyzing Rachel from head to toe, before responding with a rehearsed smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm Rachel Lewis, from Lewis Auto Service in Springfield. Frank knows me. I need to urgently resolve the purchase of a part." "One moment." The receptionist made an internal call, speaking in a low voice. After a few moments, she informed, "Unfortunately, Mr. Frank is in a meeting. I suggest you schedule an appointment for tomorrow." Frustration began to grow within Rachel. She knew that Frank probably wasn't in any meeting. They simply didn't want a dirty mechanic circulating through the immaculate dealership environment. "It's an emergency. I'm willing to wait," she insisted, keeping her voice firm. "As I said, I suggest that—" "Any problem, Tiffany?" The male voice interrupted the conversation. A tall man around 50, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, approached the counter. "No, Mr. Vanderbilt, this lady is looking for Frank in parts, but he's in a meeting." The man studied Rachel with an analytical look before introducing himself. "Alan Vanderbilt, owner of Premium Motors. How can I help?" Rachel felt the weight of that name. Alan Vanderbilt was known in the automotive sector as an extremely successful businessman, owner of several luxury dealerships in the state of Illinois. He was also famous for his difficult temperament and traditionalist views. Rachel Lewis, mechanical engineer and owner of Lewis Auto Service in Springfield. "I came personally to pick up a high-pressure pump for a Volkswagen that's in my shop. The customer depends on the truck for his livelihood and can't wait for the normal delivery time." Vanderbilt raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the formal and articulate presentation that contrasted with Rachel's casual appearance. "Lewis Auto Service? Never heard of it. We're a small but growing shop. We specialize in complex electronic diagnostics," replied Rachel, maintaining eye contact despite the growing discomfort. "And you're the owner?" The tone was of barely disguised disbelief. "Yes, and also the responsible engineer. Graduated from the College of Engineering at UIC. A shadow of interest crossed Vanderbilt's face. "UIC? Interesting. But you graduated and ended up in a little neighborhood shop." The provocation was clear, but Rachel had faced worse comments. "I prefer to say that I built my own business from scratch, serving customers who value technical quality above appearances." A tense silence hung between them. Some nearby customers discreetly observed the scene, while the receptionist seemed uncomfortable with the imminent confrontation. Surprisingly, a slight smile appeared on Vanderbilt's face. "Tiffany, call the warehouse and see if we have the part that Engineer Lewis needs." While they waited, Vanderbilt continued, "So, a UIC engineer who fixes trucks. I must admit, it's unusual." "It shouldn't be," replied Rachel. "I know brilliant engineers who have never laid hands on a real engine. Theory without practice is like a car without wheels, impressive in appearance but doesn't go anywhere." The businessman let out a short laugh. "Philosophizing about cars. You really are unusual." At that moment, the receptionist returned. "With the information, Mr. Vanderbilt, we have the part in stock. Frank said he can release it immediately." "Great. What's the price?" asked Rachel, already opening her purse. $7,800, informed Tiffany. Rachel hesitated for a moment. It was a significant amount, and although she had brought the company card, it would be a considerable investment. For her small shop, Thompson would probably pay in installments, which meant she would bear the immediate cost. "No problem. I can pay right now," she said, hiding her concern. Vanderbilt observed her with renewed curiosity. "You seem very committed to helping this truck customer." "It's the right thing to do. He trusted me and my shop. I can't let him down." Something in that response seemed to resonate with the businessman. "You know, Engineer Lewis, I have an interesting problem in the shop. A Ferrari 488 GTB that's been driving us crazy for weeks. We've changed practically everything, and the problem persists." Rachel felt a mixture of surprise and skepticism. Why was he telling her this? Ferrari with an intermittent problem? Probably the electronic engine management system, she commented, almost automatically. Exactly what we suspect, but our technicians, all certified by the factory, can't identify the root cause. Tiffany returned with a package containing the high-pressure pump and the card machine. As Rachel inserted the card and typed the password, Vanderbilt continued. "I have a proposal for you, Engineer Lewis. A challenge, actually." Rachel looked at him intrigued. "If you can solve the Ferrari problem by the end of the day, I'll pay $100,000. If you fail, you'll have to come here personally and publicly apologize for making all of us waste time with your charade." The smile on Vanderbilt's lips revealed that he didn't expect her to accept. He was clearly provoking, testing how far the confidence of this woman who dared to invade a traditionally male territory went. The proposal was absurd, almost offensive. Rachel should take her part and leave as quickly as possible. She had Thompson's, truck waiting, employees depending on her guidance, and a full schedule for the rest of the week. But something inside her, perhaps the same stubborn spirit that had made her face prejudiced university professors and mocking mechanics, refused to back down from that challenge. "And if I accept and win the challenge, in addition to the payment, will you publicly admit that you were wrong about me?" The question seemed to catch Vanderbilt by surprise. He hesitated for a moment, as if assessing the seriousness of the situation for the first time. "Of course. You can even record it on video to show your little mechanic friends back in Springfield," he finally replied, extending his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Rachel looked at the clock. It was 11:40 a.m. If she called Josh and explained the situation, he could reorganize the day's services. As for Thompson's truck, the part was already purchased. She could ask Paul to pick it up in Evanston at the end of the workday. "We have a deal," she said, shaking Vanderbilt's hand firmly. "But I'll need to call my shop first." The businessman nodded, seeming simultaneously amused and curious. "Tiffany, take Engineer Lewis to the VIP waiting room for her to make her call. Afterwards, Santiago will accompany her to the technical shop." As she followed the receptionist through the impeccably decorated corridor, Rachel felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This could be the opportunity that would completely change the course of her career, or a monumental embarrassment. In the exclusive waiting room with Italian leather armchairs and gourmet coffee available, Rachel called Josh and quickly explained the situation. "Are you crazy?" was the immediate response from the old mechanic. "Ferrari at Premium Motors? That Vanderbilt is known for destroying reputations. If anything goes wrong, he'll expose you in the media, in the sector's WhatsApp groups, everywhere." "I know, Josh. But if I succeed, imagine what that could mean for the shop, for all of us." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "And if you don't succeed?" Rachel looked through the panoramic window of the VIP room, observing the courtyard where luxurious cars were being delivered to smiling customers. "I have to succeed. It's not just for me. It's for all the girls who grow up hearing that a woman's place isn't in the workshop." After organizing the pending matters with Josh, Rachel was led by Santiago, a middle-aged man with a permanently bored expression, to the dealership's technical area. The contrast with the front part was significant, although still much cleaner, and more organized than most shops. Here there were finally signs of real work: tools, parts, the familiar smell of oil, and the distant sound of engines being tested. At the back of the spacious shed, isolated in a special box, there it was, a red Ferrari 488 GTB with its aggressive lines and imposing presence. Even for Rachel, who had worked on luxury cars before, that machine inspired respect. It was the materialization of decades of precision engineering, Italian design, and the pursuit of automotive perfection. "This is the problematic one," announced Santiago with studied disinterest. You have until 6 p.m. to solve the mystery that our best technicians couldn't in 3 weeks. Good luck." The tone made it clear that he didn't believe in her chance of success. Around her, mechanics and technicians observed with expressions ranging from mockery to barely disguised contempt. One of them, young and apparently more sympathetic than the others, approached discreetly. "I'm Luke, intern. If you need any tool or technical manual, I can help." Rachel thanked him with a nod, already focused on the task ahead. She knew she had no time to waste with introductions or explanations. She needed to dive immediately into the problem. "Luke, can you tell me what exactly is the symptom presented?" "Failure in acceleration between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM, mainly when the car is already hot. Sometimes the check engine light comes on momentarily and then turns off by itself." It was a familiar description to Rachel. Intermittent problems like that often had elusive causes, the reason why so many technicians failed to diagnose them correctly. "I'll need the diagnostic scanner, preferably the original Ferrari one, and access to the service history performed on this vehicle in the last 6 months." Luke nodded and left quickly, while the other technicians watched with skeptical expressions. One of them, a corpulent man with the name Ryan embroidered on his uniform, approached with an intimidating posture. "Look at that. The little girl from the tiny shop thinks she's going to unravel the Ferrari mystery," he commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Just so you know, 3 factory specialists have already been here. The problem is intermittent and impossible to replicate in a controlled environment." Rachel didn't let herself be intimidated. If it's intermittent and difficult to replicate, it's probably related to temperature, vibration, or electrical interference. No failure is truly random in mechanical or electronic systems. They only seem to be when we're not observing the correct variables. The technical and confident response seemed to momentarily disconcert Ryan, who walked away muttering something about theoretical engineers. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. Luke quickly returned with an official Ferrari diagnostic tablet and a folder containing the service history. Rachel thanked him with a brief smile and immediately immersed herself in the data. The first thing she noticed was the impressive amount of parts replaced in recent weeks. Oxygen sensors, ignition coils, injectors, even the main electronic control unit had been changed. A fortune in parts with no effective result. "Interesting," she murmured to herself, leafing through the service records. "No one thought to verify the authenticity of the installed parts?" Luke leaned in, curious. "What do you mean?" "In smaller shops like mine, we occasionally receive cars that have undergone services with non-original parts or low-quality remanufactured ones. With Ferraris, this is less common, but not impossible, especially if the car was bought used." Connecting the scanner to the Ferrari system, Rachel began to analyze not just the error codes recorded, but also the real-time operating parameters. Something in the data pattern caught her attention almost immediately. "Look at this," she pointed to Luke, showing a subtle discrepancy in the temperature readings. The primary and secondary sensors have a variation of almost 3 degrees between them. In a precision system like this, it should be at most half a degree. Can that cause the acceleration failure? Not directly, but it indicates a calibration problem or incorrect installation. Let's check the sensor physically. As Rachel leaned over the Ferrari's hot engine, she felt someone's presence behind her. It was Alan Vanderbilt, accompanied by a man in an Italian suit who clearly didn't belong to the technical team. "So, Engineer Lewis, have you given up yet, or are you just admiring the Italian work of art?" asked Vanderbilt with barely disguised sarcasm. Rachel straightened up, cleaning her hands on the rag she carried in her pocket. "Actually, I've already identified some interesting inconsistencies. The service history shows repeated component replacements without a systematic diagnosis. It's like changing the tire when the problem is in the shock absorber." The man beside Vanderbilt frowned, visibly interested in the observation. "Do you believe the problem might be in something that hasn't been checked yet?" "Exactly. And more, there are indications of possible non-original or poorly calibrated components in the system. Rachel pointed to the tablet. These patterns of temperature variation are characteristic of incompatible or poorly installed sensors. Vanderbilt seemed uncomfortable with the precise technical analysis. Edward owns this Ferrari, bought it 6 months ago and has been facing problems since then. Edward extended his hand. Edward Mitchell, pleasure. I must admit I'm impressed with your initial analysis. No one had mentioned the possibility of non-original parts. Rachel shook Edward's hand, noticing the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a clear indication of his purchasing power. The problem with cars of this level of sophistication is that many shops treat symptoms instead of causes. May I ask some questions about the vehicle's history? While Vanderbilt walked away to answer a call, Edward explained that he had bought the Ferrari from a collector in Bloomington. The car had only 7,500 miles and seemed in perfect condition, but soon began to show intermittent failures. Did the previous owner mention any special maintenance or modification? Asked Rachel. He said he had installed a sports exhaust system to improve the sound, but assured it was homologated by Ferrari. That information raised an alert in Rachel's mind. Modifications to the exhaust system could directly affect the readings of the oxygen sensors and consequently the entire electronic engine management. I need to check this exhaust system and the associated sensors, she decided. Luke, can you bring me an industrial endoscope? And I need the exact specifications of the original oxygen sensors for this model. The following hours were of intense investigative work. Rachel meticulously examined each suspect component, checked electrical connections, analyzed performance data, and compared specifications. The Ferrari box became her laboratory, and gradually, a small group of technicians began to form around her, observing her systematic methodology with growing interest. I found something, she finally announced after almost 3 hours of investigation. With the help of the endoscope, she had located a small defect in the weld that connected the sports exhaust system to the original manifold. This microfissure is allowing ambient air to enter the post-catalytic converter system, corrupting the readings of the secondary oxygen sensor. Luke leaned in to see the image on the monitor. But that wouldn't explain the acceleration failure, would it? Not directly, but look at this. Rachel showed the serial number of one of the oxygen sensors. This sensor has a different code than specified in the manual. It looks original at first glance, but it's a sophisticated replica. Ryan, the hostile mechanic from before, approached with skepticism. Impossible. All parts came directly from the official importer. This one didn't, stated Rachel with conviction. I checked Ferrari's online database through the tablet. This specific serial number is not listed as legitimate. It's a high-quality counterfeit, probably installed when the exhaust system was modified. Intern Luke suddenly seemed nervous. I saw this sensor being changed before, but they asked me not to record it in the official system. They said it was a special procedure. A tense silence took over the environment. Rachel continued. Her explanation, maintaining the technical focus. The counterfeit sensor, combined with the microfissure in the exhaust, is sending inconsistent data to the electronic control unit. At low RPMs, the system manages to compensate for the incorrect readings, but between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM, when the gas flow reaches a critical point, the unit receives conflicting information and enters protection mode, temporarily reducing power. Edward, who had returned to follow the diagnosis, seemed impressed. That would explain why the problem only occurs when the car is hot and in intense acceleration. Exactly, and it also explains why changing the electronic control unit didn't solve it. The problem was never in it, but in the incorrect information it received. Vanderbilt, who had been observing from a distance with an increasingly tense expression, finally spoke up. And how do you intend to prove this theory? Simple. We'll replace the counterfeit sensor with an original one and repair the weld in the exhaust system. If I'm right, the problem will completely disappear. The tension in the air was palpable. Ryan exchanged nervous glances with another older mechanic, who subtly shook his head in warning. Rachel realized there was something bigger at stake. Probably someone on the team knew about the counterfeit part and had tried to cover up the problem. Edward, unaware of the internal tensions of the shop, was increasingly confident in Rachel's analysis. How long would it take to make these corrections? With the correct parts, no more than 2 hours, she replied. Then let's do it right now, decided Edward. Alan, get an original sensor immediately. Vanderbilt hesitated for a moment, as if considering arguing, but the determination on Edward's face, clearly an important customer, left no room for discussion. Certainly, I'll personally check the inventory. While they waited, Rachel took the opportunity to examine the Ferrari's electronic system in more detail. Connecting her own laptop to the scanner, she ran an advanced diagnostic program she had developed during college, a tool that allowed visualizing data patterns that conventional systems didn't detect. "What's that?" asked Luke, fascinated by the colorful interface that showed real-time undulations and peaks. "A software I created for predictive analysis of electronic failures. It maps patterns and correlations that would normally go unnoticed." Rachel pointed to an anomaly in the graph. "See, besides the counterfeit sensor, there are records of manipulation in the EEPROM memory of the control unit." "What do you mean?" "Someone tried to reprogram critical parameters of the electronic control unit, probably to mask the effects of the counterfeit part." Rachel frowned, increasingly convinced that she was facing a more complex situation than a simple mechanical failure. "Luke, this is irregular. Ferrari doesn't authorize this type of reprogramming outside the factory." The young intern paled. "Ryan said it was a special procedure for modified cars." "It's not. It's a direct violation of the manufacturer's security protocols and potentially dangerous for the vehicle and its driver." Edward, who was listening to the conversation, seemed increasingly disturbed. "Are you saying they deliberately tampered with my car?" "The evidence points to that," confirmed Rachel, "possibly to hide the use of non-original parts or try to correct problems without investing in the correct diagnosis." Vanderbilt returned with a small sealed package containing the original sensor. His expression was a mixture of irritation and concern. "Here it is, as requested." "Thank you," replied Rachel, carefully checking the authenticity of the part before beginning the replacement. "We'll also need to correct the weld in the exhaust system and restore the original parameters of the electronic control unit." "Restore parameters?" Vanderbilt's voice had a defensive tone. "What parameters?" "The ones that were irregularly modified, Mr. Vanderbilt. I found clear evidence of unauthorized manipulation in the EEPROM." Rachel's gaze was direct and challenging. "The type of manipulation that Ferrari considers a warranty violation." A intense silence took over the environment. Edward looked from Rachel to Vanderbilt, clearly connecting the dots. "Alan, did you know about this?" Edward's question hung in the air like an accusation. Before Vanderbilt could respond, Rachel intervened. "We can discuss the implications later. Now, I need space to work on the solution." The following hours were of intense technical work. With Luke's reluctant help, and under Edward's watchful eye, Rachel replaced the counterfeit sensor, corrected the problematic weld in the exhaust system, and using her proprietary software, restored the original parameters of the electronic control unit. It was almost 5 p.m. when she finally stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It's ready. We can test it now." Edward didn't hesitate to take the keys and enter the vehicle. Under the anxious gaze of all present, he started the powerful biturbo V8 engine. The characteristic sound of the Ferrari filled the environment, smooth and threatening at the same time. "I'm going to take a spin around the block," he announced. "I'll be back in a few minutes." While Edward left with the car, Vanderbilt approached Rachel, speaking in a low voice. "I don't know what you think you discovered here, but you're playing with fire, Engineer Lewis. This world is bigger and more complex than your little shop in Springfield. The world of automotive mechanics is the same everywhere, Mr. Vanderbilt, governed by physical principles, not by status or appearances." Rachel kept her voice calm but firm. "Counterfeit parts and unauthorized manipulations are serious problems. regardless of the price of the vehicle. Before the conversation could continue, the unmistakable sound of the Ferrari engine announced Edward's return. The businessman parked the car with a broad smile on his face and got out animatedly. "Impressive," he exclaimed. "I accelerated. Up to 7,000 RPM several times and no failure. The car is responding like never before." The expression of relief on Rachel's face contrasted with Vanderbilt's evident discomfort and the visible tension in Ryan, who observed from a distance. "I still recommend a more prolonged test," suggested Rachel. The problem was intermittent and related to engine heating. A complete test would require at least half an hour of driving under different conditions. "We'll do that," agreed Edward enthusiastically. "But I'm convinced that you solved the problem that no one else could. Identify in weeks." Turning to Vanderbilt, he added in a more serious tone, "And it seems we have other matters to discuss, Alan, about counterfeit parts and unauthorized manipulations." Vanderbilt swallowed hard, his countenance now visibly worried. "Edward, I can explain. These are standard procedures for modified vehicles like yours." "They're not," intervened Rachel. "And as the owner of a vehicle of this level, Mr. Mitchell deserves complete transparency." A small group of customers who were waiting for services in the VIP area had approached, attracted by the unusual scene of a Ferrari being tested and by the increasingly heated discussion. Among them, Rachel noticed a man who seemed particularly interested, taking notes discreetly on his cell phone. Edward, now visibly irritated, directly confronted Vanderbilt. "I want a complete report of everything that was done to this car since I brought it here, and I want to know exactly who authorized the use of counterfeit parts in a $1.5 million vehicle." Vanderbilt, cornered, tried to minimize the situation. "Let's discuss this in private, Edward. There's no need to—" "There's every need," cut in Edward. "This engineer, whom you clearly underestimated, not only solved the problem that your specialized team couldn't in weeks, but also discovered potentially fraudulent practices in your shop." The man who was taking notes approached, introducing himself. "Richard Torres from the American Association of Supercar Owners. Very interesting what I'm witnessing here." Vanderbilt's face visibly paled. The association was known for its rigor in evaluating shops and dealerships, and its opinion directly influenced the choice of the wealthiest owners. "Torres, this is just a technical misunderstanding," tried to explain Vanderbilt. "It doesn't seem so," replied Torres dryly, turning to Rachel. "Could you explain to me exactly what you found in this vehicle?" Rachel hesitated, aware that she was at a professional crossroads. She could use that moment to completely expose the questionable practices of premium motors, potentially causing irreparable damage to Vanderbilt's reputation. Or she could adopt a more diplomatic approach, focusing only on the technical solution, without emphasizing the possible irregularities. The expectant gazes of everyone fixed on Rachel. That moment wasn't just about a luxury car with mechanical problems. It was about professional integrity, about the technical truth that couldn't be distorted by power games or prejudices. "I found 3 interdependent problems," began Rachel, opting for the path of technical precision. "First, a non-original oxygen sensor installed during the modification of the exhaust system. Second, a micro-fissure in the weld that connects the sports exhaust to the original system. Third, modified parameters in the electronic control unit, probably in an attempt to compensate for the first 2 problems." Torres noted each word with genuine interest. "And is this common in shops specializing in supercars?" "Modifications are common, but they must be transparent and follow rigorous specifications," replied Rachel. "The problem here wasn't the modifications themselves, but the lack of transparency and the use of inadequate components." Vanderbilt, realizing that Rachel wasn't being deliberately destructive, tried to regain some control of the situation. "Obviously, there were failures in the process that we need to investigate internally. I thank Engineer Lewis for identifying these issues." The forcefully cordial tone didn't fool anyone, but it offered a diplomatic exit from the tense situation. Edward, however, didn't seem willing to let the subject die so easily. "I want to know exactly who authorized these modifications to my car without my knowledge, and why I spent weeks paying for very expensive parts when the problem could have been solved much earlier. Ryan, the hostile mechanic, stepped forward, surprising everyone. It was my decision, Mr. Mitchell. When the car arrived with the modified exhaust system, I realized we would need adjustments in the calibration. The original sensor was damaged and the import deadline would be weeks. We used an alternative to avoid leaving you without the car. An alternative that could have caused permanent damage to the engine, observed Rachel. These systems are calibrated with microscopic precision precisely because the tolerances are minimal. Torres shook his head, clearly disappointed. Alan, do you know how many owners trust their multi-million-dollar cars to premium motors? This is unacceptable. I completely agree, replied Vanderbilt, now in damage control mode. Ryan is suspended until further notice, and we'll conduct a complete audit of all processes. Turning to Edward, he added, naturally, all services performed will be refunded, and Premium takes full responsibility. While the discussion between Vanderbilt, Torres, and Edward continued, Rachel discreetly moved away to clean her tools. Luke, the intern, approached with an admiring expression. How did you manage to identify all this in just a few hours? Rachel smiled, carefully cleaning a precision wrench. I didn't start by trying to prove I knew more than everyone. I started by listening to what the car was saying. Each component, each system, has its own voice when something is wrong. Most problems tell their story if we're willing to listen. Did you develop that diagnostic software by yourself? During my senior project at UIC, I worked as a gas station attendant at night to pay for the computer I needed for programming. Rachel put away the tools in the small case she had brought. No one believed that a woman from the suburbs of Springfield could create a predictive diagnostic algorithm, but here we are. Alan Vanderbilt approached, interrupting the conversation. His normally confident face now showed a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. Engineer Lewis, I'd like to talk privately if possible. Rachel nodded and followed Vanderbilt to his private office, an elegant space overlooking the main showroom of the dealership. On the walls, certificates of excellence and photos with personalities from motorsport created an aura of prestige and authority. Please sit down, indicated Vanderbilt, settling into his Italian leather armchair. For the first time, the tone of superiority had completely disappeared from his voice. I must admit that I seriously underestimated you. You're not the first, Rachel replied simply. Torres is a powerful influencer in the supercar world. A negative report from him could cause significant damage to Premium Motors. I imagine so. Vanderbilt studied her for a moment as if completely reassessing his initial perception. I have a proposal for you. I need someone with your talent and integrity supervising our technical shop. I'm willing to offer a salary well above the market, plus benefits and profit sharing. The offer caught Rachel by surprise. This same man, who hours earlier had treated her with disdain, was now offering a prestigious position in his company. Why me? She asked directly. Because you did in 4 hours what my entire team couldn't do in weeks. Because you have impeccable technical knowledge and, more importantly, integrity. And frankly, because if I don't hire you, Edward Mitchell and Torres will probably recommend you to all their millionaire friends, and you'll become a formidable competitor. Rachel couldn't contain an ironic smile. It was a tempting proposal, financially secure, prestigious, a validation of everything she had fought for over the years. And the challenge that you proposed. The $100,000 if I fix the Ferrari. Vanderbilt opened a drawer and took out a checkbook. I'm a man of my word, even when I'm wrong. He filled out the check and slid it across the desk. You won fair and square. Rachel looked at the check. $100,000 that could completely transform her small shop in Springfield. It could finance new equipment, expansion of the space, hiring more employees. Thank you, but I need to think about your job offer. I have a team that depends on me in Springfield. Naturally, bring them too if you want. I have space for talented mechanics. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Edward Mitchell, still visibly irritated with the situation, but now with a renewed interest in his countenance. Sorry to interrupt, he said, entering without waiting for an invitation. Engineer Lewis, I need to speak with you before you leave. Vanderbilt stood up. "I'll leave you alone. Think about my proposal, Lewis." When they were alone, Edward sat in the chair that Vanderbilt had occupied. "Torres told me that you have your own shop in Springfield." "Yes, small but growing. My cousin has a multi-brand dealership network. He's looking for someone to lead a new advanced technology center in Chicago. After what I saw today, I can't think of anyone more qualified." Rachel smiled, feeling a strange vertigo. In a single day, she had gone from a small-town mechanic fighting to be taken seriously to a professional disputed by influential businessmen. "I appreciate the confidence, Mr. Mitchell, but—" "Edward, please. And before you answer, know that the position includes total autonomy to assemble your team and implement your own diagnostic protocols, including that impressive software you developed." The conversation continued for almost an hour. Edward explained in detail the project of the Technology Center, a space that would combine a high-precision shop with applied research in advanced automotive diagnostics. The vision was to create a hub of technical excellence that would elevate the standard of services in the United States to international levels. When she finally left the office, Rachel felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified. In her purse, besides the $100,000 check, were the cards of Edward Mitchell and Richard Torres, both with invitations for formal meetings the following week. In the parking lot, she found Luke anxiously waiting. "So, Vanderbilt offered you a job, didn't he?" Rachel smiled. "How did you guess? He would be an idiot not to. I've never seen anyone dismantle a problem so methodically as you did." The young intern hesitated before continuing. "You know, I'm finishing my technical course in mechanics at the community college. I've always dreamed of working with supercars, but here, well, you saw how things work. Are you looking for a job, Luke?" The young man's eyes sparkled with hope. "If one day you need an assistant who doesn't mind learning from a female boss—" Rachel noted her number in Luke's cell phone. "I'm going to need good people soon, very soon." It was almost night when Rachel finally managed to get into her car to return to Springfield. Before starting the engine, she called Josh. "So, boss, did you solve the case of the mysterious Ferrari?" The old mechanic's voice carried a mixture of skepticism and hope. "I solved it," she replied simply. "And I think we'll need to talk about the future of the shop when I get back." "Does that mean what I think it means?" "It means we'll need a bigger space, new equipment, and maybe a few more employees." Josh's satisfied laugh was answer enough. During the journey back, as the lights of oncoming cars created hypnotic patterns on the windshield, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the girl who watched her father fix engines to the engineer who had just proven her worth in the most hostile environment possible, each challenge, each closed door, each derogatory comment had been a brick in the construction of who she had become. She thought of her father, who had believed in her when no one else did, of her mother, who even without understanding her passion, had eventually learned to respect it, of Josh, who had risked his own job to support her in difficult times, of each person who in some way had contributed to her trajectory, both those who supported her and those who tried to knock her down. As she crossed the Springfield city limits, a feeling of accomplishment invaded her. It wasn't just about proving that women could be excellent mechanics and engineers. It was about proving to herself that passion, when fueled by dedication and resilience, eventually finds its way. The next morning, Lewis Auto Service opened its doors as always, at 7:30 a.m. sharp. Josh was already there, reorganizing tools while listening to the radio. Mary, the young apprentice, was preparing coffee in the small improvised pantry. Paul was checking the day's schedule, organizing service orders by priority. Anthony, as usual, had arrived before everyone else, just to have a few moments of silence in the shop that was now commanded by his daughter. When Rachel parked and got out of the car, everyone stopped what they were doing. The news of her feat at Premium Motors had already circulated among them, partially told by Josh, partially imagined with exaggerated details. "So, how was it defeating the rich boys at the fancy dealership?" asked Paul, barely containing his curiosity. Rachel smiled, throwing the car keys to Mary. "Put it on the lift and check that noise in the drive shaft, please. We have a lot of work today." "But what about the story, the challenge, the money?" insisted Paul. "Meeting in 5 minutes in the pantry. We have a lot to talk about regarding the future." Rachel walked to her small office at the back, where the UIC diploma shared space with team photos and a shelf of classic car trophies that her father collected. Sitting at the simple wooden desk, she picked up the phone to make a call she had been postponing since the night before. 3 rings later, the familiar voice answered. "Hello? Hi, Mum. It's me." "Rachel, your father told me you went to solve a problem in Evanston yesterday. Did everything go well?" There was a moment of hesitation. For so many years, Martha had been the voice of skepticism, the personification of the doubts that society projected onto her daughter's professional choice. But now, surprisingly, her voice carried genuine interest and concern. "It went more than well, Mum. I think I finally found my place." On the other end of the line, Martha was silent for a few seconds before responding with a choked voice. "Your grandfather would be so proud, daughter. He always said you had the gift since you were little." "My grandfather, but he hardly saw me grow up." "He saw more than you imagine. Did you know it was he who gave the first toolbox to your father? He used to say that in the Lewis family, the talent for machines skipped a generation. Seems like he was right." That revelation hit Rachel like a final piece fitting into a complex puzzle. Somehow it completed a circle, connecting her to a lineage of people who saw beyond appearances, who understood the language of machines. "Thank you for telling me that, Mum. Come have dinner at home tonight. Your father is eager to know all, the details of your adventure at the luxury dealership." As she hung up, Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the simultaneous weight and lightness of all the possibilities that opened up before her. The path would never be easy. Prejudices don't disappear overnight, and technical challenges would always arise. But now there was something different. Recognition, not just from others, but from herself. In the small pantry, her team was anxiously waiting. Josh had prepared coffee for everyone and improvised a small table with cookies, almost an anticipated celebration. "Before anything else," began Rachel, looking at each of them, "I want to thank you for believing, for staying, for building this with me." "Cut it out, boss," interrupted Paul with his irreverent way. "Just tell us how you humiliated those rich guys at Premium Motors." Everyone laughed, including Rachel. And then, with the simplicity of someone sharing family stories, she told every detail of the previous day's journey, the challenge, the technical discoveries, the moment of triumph. She told about the job offers, about the $100,000 check, about the doors that were opening. "And now," asked Mary when she finished the report, "are you going to accept the job at the luxury dealership?" Rachel smiled, looking at the small group. That had become her second family. "Now we're going to do what we've always done, fix cars with excellence, just in a bigger space with better equipment and maybe with some more interesting customers." "And Lewis Auto Service?" questioned Josh. "Always practical." "Lewis Auto Service will grow, but it will never lose its essence." Rachel raised her coffee cup in an improvised toast. "Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we're fixing a